Hello, I'm Orkhan Amashov here. You're watching Context, where we throw an inquisitive glance at key developments of global and regional magnitude. In their latest telephone exchange, US President Donald Trump and his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky appeared to have moved past prior tensions, discussing tangible steps towards stabilizing Ukraine. The conversation marked a shift from their abrupt February exchange, which saw the absolute collapse of the talks. On this occasion, however, the tone was different, with the Ukrainian leader describing the meeting as positive, frank and very substantive indeed. Writing on his social media platform Truth Social subsequent to the meeting, President Donald Trump said that the aim here was to align Ukraine and Russia in terms of their requests and needs. Fundamentally, as far as one can tell, a key outcome was a partial ceasefire agreement focused on protecting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, a significant step in mitigating the conflict's broader economic and humanitarian toll. Zelensky affirmed Ukraine's commitment to the truce, viewing it as a pathway to broader de-escalation. US President Donald Trump, in a bold move, proposed US oversight of Ukrainian power plants, including nuclear facilities, to safeguard them from potential threats. This underscores Washington's intent to play a more active role in Ukraine's long-term security. That's what many analysts appear to think, at least. Additionally, Trump is said to have agreed to bolster Ukraine's air defenses, addressing one of Kyiv's most pressing needs. The discussion concluded with an agreement to advance peace talks through technical teams in Saudi Arabia, hinting at a diplomatic recalibration. While concrete resolutions remain elusive, this latest dialogue reflects a measurable degree of palpable progress, the true nature of which remains prone to different interpretations. And today, joining me now to discuss this very interesting development, its possible ramifications, are Ambassador Gustavo de Aristegui, former Spanish diplomat and politician, a scholar, and author of many influential works on foreign policy matters, joining us from Morocco, and Mr. Mike Jones, journalist and geopolitical commentator, joining from Moscow, Russia. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ambassador Aristegui, what is your reading of the current situation? Do you think this partial ceasefire agreement, or at least discussions about what is to be achieved, is substantive?
I have sort of mixed feelings, to be frank. I was very pessimistic at the beginning when I saw the developments that happened in the White House. I thought that it was extremely impolite from both sides, not just from the American side, as has been said. And I've seen more criticism on the Ukrainian political side than in the Western media about what happened that terrible day. In any case, the developments that happened later, again, I say, produce mixed feelings. On the one hand, the ceasefire that has been proposed is only partial, and the suffering, the human suffering, is not going to stop, because only critical infrastructure and civilian infrastructure is going to be spared from bombardment. This means that cities and populations are not going to be spared, at least from now until the permanent ceasefire is achieved. In any case, there are two things that I'd like to underline. One is that the annexations that Russia has claimed since 2014 are going to be accepted and acknowledged by the international community as imposed by the Trump plan and the red lines that have been imposed by the Russian leadership. And on the other hand, the assurances of security are meager at best. Just the fact that the Americans are going to be present in the exploitation of the mineral wealth of Ukraine is, in my view, not enough to guarantee the security of the country. And the very fact that the Russians pretend or actually demand that there be a demilitarized zone all along the border of the lands that they have already conquered is a very troubling sign. In any case, the Ukrainian side has accepted the principle of this plan. Let's hope that an intelligent, balanced, and reasonable position prevails, and that both sides need to understand that they have to give up something. Otherwise, in a negotiation, nobody can win 10-0. The normal outcome is 6-4, 7-3, but never 10-0.
Mr. Jones, given the latest Trump-Zelensky telephone conversation, how does Moscow perceive the potential US oversight of Ukrainian energy infrastructure, including nuclear facilities? It looks like something quite important, at least, and some Ukrainian analysts believe that this is the beginning of the type of security guarantees that Ukraine will eventually get.
I haven't seen any official comments from Moscow regarding specifically this talk of, it was actually American ownership that Trump said was the best tool. And I can only assume he's referring specifically to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which has been an area of contention with numerous Ukrainian drone and artillery strikes against it. Recently, the IAEA team on rotation were attacked by such drones by the Ukrainian side, despite their seeming inability to date to actually categorically condemn Ukraine for doing so. Overall, I share the sentiments of what the ambassador has said, only a slight few details that I would sort of contend with, whereby the bombardment of cities and populations I've witnessed firsthand in Gorlovka by specifically the Ukrainian side. I share the ambassador's pessimism in many regards, because what we've seen from Trump so far are ideas. He says about this idea of oversight or even ownership of Ukraine's energy. As President Putin has pointed out, not specifically in this case, but overall, when there was a talk of a ceasefire, he points out, how does that work in practice? What are the realities here? How can you enforce such things? How can you regulate this? The OCSE has already proven themselves untrustworthy, unreliable. It's a red line for European peacekeeping forces. That is not acceptable for Russia under any circumstances. Lavrov has also he's also confirmed this. So we see a lot from both sides, well, mainly America, but also Ukraine, this talk of ideas. The ambassador highlighted this change from Zelensky. Boris Johnson just yesterday was clipped in an interview admitting that there is a Ukrainian nationalist problem that blocked peace in 2019. To the point of Zelensky's utter disgraceful behavior in the White House and his subsequent shaming in both Western and Russian media, his tune has changed with that threat of withholding aid. So Trump is definitely, Zelensky praised him for his strong leadership. I interpreted that as the fact as he gave Ukraine no choice. You will go along with these ceasefire proposals and agreements, and you will agree to them. And what's disappointing to me, and quite frankly baffling, perhaps the ambassador can give some insight here, is why the US would say, we'll withhold arms until you agree to a ceasefire, and then we'll continue supplying them. Surely that is, in effect, sabotaging any prospect of peace. So let's take, for example, drones. I don't know specifics, but we'll stop your supply of drones so you can't bombard Russia's energy sector. Until you agree to a ceasefire, then we'll rearm you so you can carry on whilst you're talking about peace. It really doesn't make much sense, particularly in reality. And that's the overall theme that I've read into all these back and forths between the three leaders.
Ambassador, as a follow-up to what Mr. Jones said earlier, given past difficulties in securing long-term Western military aid, how does Trump's renewed air defense support compared to previous commitments declared by the United States? And what do you make of what Mr. Jones said earlier?
I think that we have to make a threefold differentiation here. Yeah. There's three possibilities that are on the table. One was the maximalist pretensions and demands from Russia, which was the complete demilitarization of Ukraine, which is completely unthinkable today. I mean, to neutralize Ukraine as the Soviet Union imposed on Finland in 1946, as a consequence of their defeat in a conventional war between November of 1939 and March of 1940. They knew that the Finns were formidable adversaries and that they could not have such a formidable adversary on their borders that was not neutralized. Well, this is a bit what the Russian regime wants today. They would want a neutralized Ukraine. So right now that is not envisageable. What can happen, and most surely will happen, is that Ukraine will not be part of NATO because the United States will simply veto its joining NATO. But they cannot veto Ukraine joining the European Union eventually when and if Ukraine eventually meets the very strict and very stiff criteria that exist today to join the European Union. It's not just a political will. It means that there are some very stiff and harsh requisites and obligations that need to be met, and others, fight against corruption, the rule of law, transparency, accountability, and many other things that need to be improved, of course, before anybody joins or even asks to accede to the European Union. The second possibility is, of course, to keep Ukraine as a sovereign state, and that sovereign state, both sovereign states, respect whatever comes out of the negotiations. Because once and for all, if Russia does not accept the international borders that were signed in 1991, they will have to recognize whatever is signed now. And this means that this demilitarized zone that goes all along whatever has been annexed already is not a reality. There will have to be some kind of international intervention to guarantee that that is, in effect, a demilitarized zone, but you cannot take away the sovereignty of a state from a part of its territory. In international law, it's completely impossible. And the third thing is what the United States is trying to do by saying that I am going to continue my intelligence feeds and arming you is that I am going to keep you safe so that there is no temptation of a new aggression. So the perspective or the perspective of a demilitarized Ukraine is completely impossible. Nobody is going to accept it. The Polish are not going to accept it. NATO is not going to accept it. The European Union is not going to accept it. What we need is peace, and to accept that Russia is a state that is going to respect the international borders of whatever comes out of these negotiations, and that the Ukrainians are going to do the same. There's one more thing that I'd like to add. There is an internal problem that is showing up now. There is a part of the Ukrainian intelligentsia that is not happy with these negotiations, and they've already cried foul. And what we need to ask also the Ukrainians is that they need to keep their game together. I know that they are a democracy and that the differences of opinion are not only possible but necessary. Good. But right now they need to give their government and their president a vote of trust. And they need to understand that whatever comes out, even if it's not perfect, because a negotiation is never going to be perfect. It is unthinkable to even envisage the possibility that Russia gives back Crimea or anything that they have annexed in the last 3 years, and it is completely unenvisageable that the Ukrainians accept lightly and easily that they are going to lose 20% of their territory. What is not going to happen is that the Ukrainians are going to accept to lose another 10% of their territory to make the Russians feel at ease. This is not going to happen either. We cannot think of a demilitarized Ukraine. It is unthinkable, and it is a preposterous pretension from the side of the Russians.
Mr. Jones, is a demilitarized Ukraine still the objective of Russia?
Yes, it was from day one. It was one of the stated objectives of the special military operation. It remains that to this day, and this is one of the key parts of the negotiations. The ambassador has said that it's not possible. I would disagree. Unfortunately, as Biden said, to the last Ukrainian. To date, that has not been successfully achieved, given the absolutely draconian measures that have been put in place, lowering mobilization age to 18, literally kidnapping people off the streets to keep feeding into the military and to keep this war grinding on. I'd like to add a little comment there to what the ambassador said. I noticed a comment on a Russian Telegram channel regarding the conditions that had been laid out. Of course, the new territories of Kherson, Zaporozhye, Lugansk, and Donetsk People's Republics, they are enshrined in Russian law. They are part of the Russian Federation. they're not up for negotiation. Neither is Crimea. Again, it is part and protected by Russian law and the Russian Federation. Those cards are not on the table. The comment that was made was what was put forward by President Putin to Trump is if the US recognizes the new territories and Crimea as being part of the Russian Federation, which legally they now are through the referendum that took place, Russia would not carry on and take Odessa and would allow Ukraine access to the Black Sea. And here's the key truth, which perhaps people don't recognize and which I think the EU in particular are going to have to recognize, is Russia will just carry on. So one way or the other, the Ukraine will be demilitarized in the sense that its army will be vanquished and defeated. It's just, what does that look like at this point? There is no victory for Ukraine. There never was. There was only death and misery, thanks to Boris Johnson. To date, only now, we've seen Zelensky strong-armed into talks, and these are just ideas. Remember the Minsk 1 and 2 agreements, Angela Merkel admitting that they were all just ploys to militarize and arm Ukraine. This is the fear now, that Zelensky is going to agree to the idea, but in effect, as he gets those arms that are pumping back in, it will continue to just carry on and carry on. The ambassador's right, it's going to be a very painful admission for Ukraine. They've already admitted they can't return to their 1991 borders. That's not going to happen in any case. So the key point here is either we stop this now, like the ambassador says, we agree the borders, Russia has put forward what those borders would look like, and then the next point in, I believe it's Saudi Arabia in the upcoming talks, these technical teams are going to have to act on what Putin said, and is how does that look like in reality? How do we make that work that is sufficient for both parties? The other point I'll make to the ambassador is, and yourself, Trump has said about these air defense systems, the key point that I noticed in what he said was he will look for options in Europe. He didn't commit to the US supplying Patriot missiles and carrying on the flow like Biden did. Trump is very much passing the buck onto the EU, and the EU are petrified about that. We see Macron and Starmer still calling for more war, more arms, and trying to prepare themselves against Russia, if such a thing was thinkable.
Ambassador, Ukraine still receives. Please, yes, by all means, allow me just to say something,
Sure,
and then you will be able to respond. So, as I understand, Ukraine still receives quite a considerable amount of support from the UK, from other European countries, and the key sensibility there is that Ukraine needs to get this support in order to be able to negotiate properly, and plus, if anything agreed, there should be some form of security backstop, and that backstop should entail some sort of support in a military sense. Yes, please reflect please on this, and also in relation to what Mr. Jones said earlier.
Since 1945, unfortunately, we have lived a period of a bizarre peace, if you want to call it. And many times it was a no war, no peace, and war by proxy. And I have lived in many countries where this war by proxy happened. Nicaragua, in Salvador, in many other places. I've been in Lebanon, I lived there for a long time, and I lived throughout the war of Iraq. And what I can tell you is that it wasn't an easy thing to see how the two blocs until 1991 went at each other's throat through proxies. In any case, what must be recognized also, and this is fact, not opinion, is that since 1945, with all the conflicts that have happened since 1945, we still have 95% less victims than we had in the Second World War. So in spite of the failures of the world order that we gave ourselves after 1945, it still has some undeniable advantages and successes. And these successes have been the fact that the two great powers did not go to a nuclear holocaust. And this has one name, and the name is dissuasion. And to dissuade the other one from attacking you can only happen if the true and verifiable possibility of you being capable of defending yourself in a credible way is realized, accepted, and seen by the other part. So actually, what the European Union, certain countries of the European Union, I'm not saying about the maximalist positions of some leaders, I'm talking about the balanced way of thinking geopolitics. Dissuasion And arming or preparing for defense is not preparing for war. The only way to avoid this from ever happening again is that any potential aggressor knows that his aggression will be rejected and will be fought back. And this means that, for example, the European countries that have lived in prosperity and peace for 80 years and building welfare states, neglecting their security and defense, need to rethink that. And the fact that, for example, Spain goes from 1 aircraft carrier to 3, which is the plan now, and that we swap our old Harriers for F-35s, and that we increase the number of Eurofighters that we have, this doesn't mean that we're doing this to confront Russia. This means that we're telling the world and any potential enemy that we are capable of fighting back if you come and get us. This is what reorganizing European defense means. In any case, there's one thing that needs to be underlined. 850 billion euros of defense investment that has been announced by Mrs. von der Leyen doesn't mean that in 5 years, Europe is going to be able to have operational capabilities that will be able to defend Europe effectively as it is today under the conventional and strategic umbrellas of the United States of America. But it means that we are going to revitalize our defense industry, which is not up to standards today. We need to start thinking in the 6th generation fighter jet, something that the Chinese and the Russians already have, and that the West doesn't have, by the way. The only one that has a 6th generation fighter jet is the Americans with the F-22. So all of these things have to be put into the equation. And again, what I'm saying is that there are facts that show that some countries feel threatened by Russia. The fact that 2 countries that have been neutral for decades, one, Sweden, that kept their neutrality as a main characteristic and essence of their national identity, switch from neutrality to being part of NATO, and the fact that a neutralized country like Finland switches from neutrality into joining NATO is because they actually do feel threatened by Russia.
Ambassador Steger, since we are running out of time, with your high permission, of course, I would like to give last word to Mr. Jones, and then we will conclude. Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Jones, would you like to say anything in relation to what Ambassador articulated?
Yes, I think there's 2 key points here. One, Russia is certainly perceived as the aggressor. Whether it is or not, in actuality, particularly when it comes to the EU, is very much debatable, and I would argue it is not a threat to, let's say, Spain. But I agree with the ambassador in the sense that the EU has certainly rested upon and been a burden to the United States since the 1945, as the ambassador iterated. Essentially, Trump has won. Trump came in saying, the US is picking up too much of the bill for NATO. You other countries need to start paying your way. And we're seeing that. So Russia, successfully painted as the boogeyman that's going to come and get you in the night, is serving the US very well indeed. Trump taking a step back, as I've given just one small example, by saying, hey, you want Patriot missile systems? Sure, I'll give you some doors to go and knock in Europe. They can pay, they can supply, because they're going to get their acts together, because they've been resting and a burden on us for too long now. And if they don't do it, we've even threatened to essentially dissolve NATO by stepping out, because that's, I foresee, would be the actuality of that situation. I will counter that, yeah, I don't believe that Russia is the aggressor, is going for, let's say, the UK, for instance. I don't recall any specific threat by Russia upon the UK. The UK made a lot of song and dance about some of the advanced weapons like the Poseidon torpedo system and things like this. There's been a lot of scaremongering in the Western media to paint Russia as this aggressor, all the while ignoring that Putin, I believe at least once or twice, tried to join NATO and thereby also mitigate this idea that Russia is the aggressor somehow.
Well, indeed. Well, most grateful to both of you for explaining your views in a very detailed and articulate way. Grateful to both of you. Ambassador Steger and Mr. Jones, thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been an honor.
Trump and Zelensky's latest call apparently signals a shift from tension to pragmatism. a partial ceasefire on energy infrastructure, US oversight of Ukrainian power plants and enhanced air defenses probably are major takeaways from this telephone conversation. Talks in Saudi Arabia could shape next steps. But what will be Moscow's position? That's all for now. I'm Orkhan Amashov, and see you very soon indeed.